Ratios. Today we're going to talk about ratios. So first of all, what's a part-to-part ratio and what's a part-to-whole ratio? So a part-to-part ratio is when you're comparing two different parts of something. So let's say we were looking at math textbooks to science textbooks. So you would compare the total number of math textbooks to science textbooks. And so I might write down that there are 23 math textbooks to 41 science textbooks. So this just tells you how many parts of both they are. So now I might say my next step would be to say what is a part-to-whole ratio. So a part-to-whole ratio would say how many of one is there in comparison to the whole amount. So I might say how many math textbooks are there in comparison to the total amount of textbooks. And in that case, what you would do is you'd say, you know that there are 23 math textbooks. You need to find out how many whole amount there is. And in order to find out the whole amount, we take our number of math textbooks and we add the number of science textbooks and we get a total of 64. So that's a part-to-part and a part-to-whole ratio. Ratios to fractions. So ratios is when, again, a comparison between two things. So this ratio is a 4-to-3 ratio. The one thing to remember when you're taking a ratio and turning it into a fraction is that the first number in your ratio is known as your numerator, and the second number in your ratio is known as your denominator. So if you were writing this in a fraction form, your 4 would be the number on top and your 3 would be the number on the bottom. Another thing we're really quickly going to go through is taking a fraction and simplifying it, or taking a fraction and changing it. So this fraction, it would be called an improper fraction. And the reason it's called an improper fraction is because the number on the top, so your numerator, is larger than your denominator. And in that case, you need to turn it into something called a mixed fraction. And a mixed fraction is when you have a whole number and you have a fraction with it. So in order to turn this into a mixed fraction, I need to find out how many of my denominator are actually present in my numerator. And the way you do that is you take your denominator and you subtract it. So let's say my numerator is 4. I'm going to subtract 3. That means I have one whole available. And if I actually do the subtraction, 4 minus 3, I end up with 1 over, and your denominator always remains the same. So this is when you take an improper fraction and you turn it into a mixed fraction. And now my mixed fraction has already been simplified, because simplification is when you can say that your numerator cannot go any lower or your denominator cannot go any lower. That means they can only be multiplied by 1. If they can be divided by 1. If they can be divided by any other number, then you would continue to simplify. Let's go into fractions to ratios. So now we're doing the opposite thing. So again, always keep in mind that your numerator is the first number in the ratio and your denominator is the second number. So if we were converting this into a ratio, it would be a 2 to the ratio of 3. Okay, so very simple conversion from ratio to fraction, fraction to ratio. Now, finding unknown values. So finding an unknown value is when you're given two ratios or two fractions with something that is unknown. So there's two ways of doing this, and I'm going to show you both ways really quickly. So if it's given to you in a ratio form, the first thing you need to do is convert it into a fraction form just to make it easier. So I know that this number. So actually, I just realized that this fraction won't work out. So I'm actually going to delete this one and give you another one. So let's just cross this out. We're not going to do this one. Let me give you another one. So let's say I have 2 and 9 equals an unknown number to the ratio of 54. Okay, so now let's do that again. So we're going to take our ratio, convert it into a fraction form. So I have 2 over 9 equals an unknown number over 54. So there's two ways of doing this. And the first way of doing this is to find something that both of them multiply by, because you can see that our fraction is increasing. So I say 9 times something equals 54. So 9 times 9 times something equals 54. So 9 times 6 equals 54. So I know that if that equals that, whatever I do to the denominator, I have to do to my numerator. So 2 times 6 then would be 12. So that's one way of doing it. So you can either find a common number in which your numerator and your denominator can be multiplied by, or in the case of if your fraction is smaller, if this fraction ends up to be the smaller one that you're looking for, then you would go ahead and try to find the smaller value by dividing. Okay, so this is one way of doing it. Now I'm going to show you really quickly another way of doing it. And another way of doing it would be if I had again a ratio or a fraction, and this time I'm just going to do 9 to the ratio of, let's do 12. And so if I said, I wanted to do, 27 to the ratio of an unknown number. And so again, you take your ratio, you turn it into a fraction. So I'm going to go ahead and go 9 over 12 equals 27 over, and because it's an unknown number, we're going to use the variable, and we're going to say the variable is x. So in this case, you can do something called cross multiplication, where you take the numbers and you multiply them across from each other. So my equal sign remains in the same place. When I do 12 times 27, so 27 times 12 on one side, and on the other side I do 9 times my unknown, which is an x value. So 27 times 12 equals 324 equals 9x. And remember, algebraically, if I need to get my my variable on its own, so in order to get my variable on its own, I have to get rid of this 9, and because it's 9 multiplied by my variable, the opposite of multiplication is going to be division. So I'm going to divide this side by 9, and I'm going to divide this side by 9. So when I divide both sides by 9, that crosses out, and I'm left with 36 equals x value. So in this case, it might have been a little harder to find one number that they could both multiply by and find that. Instead, I just went ahead and did it algebraically, and I was able to figure out that my x value is going to be 36. So I have a question here that I want you to actually try. So read through the question, try it out, pause the video, try it out, see how you do, and then come back and I will show you how to do it. Okay, so welcome back, and we're going to work on this together so I can walk you through it. So the question says that the ratio of the length to width of the Canadian flag is 2 to 1. So that's something that we know. So if I was doing this, and again, I always tell you guys to do it with the problem-solving method of what I know. So what I know that's important here is the length to width of the Canadian flag. And so I'm going to write that down. So when my length is 2, my width is 1. And that's very important to remember, so I'm going to write that down as my first part. So I'm going to go and start solving A now. So A says the flag on the cover of a book is 8 centimeters wide. And this is the key word here, so wide. So I know wide then applies to the width. So I know that they've given me the width, and I'm solving for the length. So because it says how long is it. So in this case, my value for A for length is going to be x, and my width is going to be 8. So now I have two ratios which I can convert into fractions. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to convert them into fractions. So 2 over 1 is equal to an x value over 8. And again, you could do the multiplication or you could do the cross multiplication. In this case, multiplication would be pretty easy, right? Because I know 1 times the number would equal 8, and the only number that can be multiplied by that is 8. So 1 times 8 is 8. I know that if my denominator is multiplied by 8, my numerator is going to be multiplied by 8. And so 2 times 8 would just be 32. And sorry, not 32, 16. So I know that my x value equals 16. So that was pretty straightforward in solving that one. So now I'm going to do the second one. And again, to do the second one, so your first answer was 16, so your new ratio would be 16 to 8. Now, for the second question for part B, again, I write down what I know, and again, the same thing. What I know from the previous part has not changed. So what I know from my given information is a length to width ratio, and that length to width ratio is 2 to 1. What I'm looking for this time is different though. This says the flag outside of our school. So outside of Sunnyview, there's a flag. This flag outside of the school has a 5 centimeters long, and we need to find the width. Okay, so actually it wouldn't be 5 centimeters, that's my mistake. It would be 5 meters long, because 5 centimeters would be quite a small flag outside of our school. So it's 5 meters long, and we need to find the width. So again, now this time I say what they've given me is my length. So they've given me my length, and in this case I am solving for my width. So I've got my two ratios. I take my two ratios and I turn them into fractions. So I go ahead and I turn them into fractions. And I say, now in this case, 2 multiplied by something is going to be hard to find my 5, because I can't really think of a number that I can multiply 2 by to get 5. So in this case, I am going to do my cross multiplication to figure this question out. So when I start working on that, I say, okay, so 2 times x would be 2x. My equal sign remains the same. 5 times 1, and I'm going to write that down. I can actually just do that in my head and then say I know 5 times 1 is 5, and I don't have to write it down. It's up to you. So then again, so 2x equals 5. I need to get rid of my 2 because my 2 is next to my variable, and I need to get that variable on its own. So algebraically, it tells me I need to get rid of it. Multiplication, the opposite is division. So I divide both sides by 2, and I find out that my x value is, when I divide 5 by 2, I end up with 2.5. So in this case, the length of my flag is 5, and the width of my flag is going to be 2.5. So again, make sure you've understood this and you've tried it and you've got the correct answer, and make sure you watch the next video.